So good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're able to hear me. Okay, this is working. So I hope we've all enjoyed our lunch. We're starting our second session, which will focus on project or CCS project development and the lessons learned from a regional but also from international perspective. We'll focus more on the challenges and the opportunities that revolve around the CCS space in the MEA region. The region has set very ambitious net zero targets and climate commitments by 2050 and 2060, and highlighting CCS as a key essential climate change and decarbonization technology with Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE leading this effort. So we're going to hear more from this from our esteemed speakers today, who will be delving deeply into the CCS project development experience in the region, but also globally. And I would like to start by introducing our speakers, and please everyone join me in welcoming them, including Karina Veloso, Project Manager, Development Projects at Climeworks. Thank you. Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Jamie Zakaria, Energy Transition Business Development Manager at Petrofac. Thank you. And last but not least, Karen Himji, Chief Commercial Officer at 4401. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Just to kick off the conversation, I would love to hear from each one of you on your roles, your company, and the projects that you're engaged in on CCS in the region, but also globally. So how about we start with you, Karina?
Yes, sure. Thank you for the invitation. It is really a pleasure to be here. So I work for Climeworks, who has developed a technology to capture CO2 directly from the air, so not point source capture, really directly from the air. And for Climeworks, I am a project manager in the project development team. So we really look into the early phases of the project and develop it in order to assure its feasibility, which kind of encompasses a little bit everything, whether it is from the energy strategy, the storage developer, the engineering, assuring social license to operate with permitting and with community and stakeholder engagement. Yeah. And so my current focus is projects in the Middle East. My main focus is in Oman, and I'm also looking at projects in Norway. Climeworks has 2 operational plants. Well, the first one has been operational for 3 years. The other will be announced operations in 2 weeks' time. So those are both in Iceland, and as I think it's been seen in the media, there's been a big focus in the US following the IRA and the direct air capture hubs applications, where Climeworks was awarded with 3 projects there.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Karina.
Hello, I'm Jamie Zakaria. I lead Petrofac's efforts in the energy transition projects across the MENA region. Petrofac is very well known for its involvement in the oil and gas industry, and we're supporting our long existing clients and new clients in the energy transition field, capitalizing on the skills that are very much required and gained from the oil and gas industry, and utilizing it across a wide range of energy transition projects, including hydrogen, carbon capture, waste to value, emissions reductions, and offshore wind projects. I mean, Oman as a core market for Petrofac. We've been in this region for over 40 years. A lot of the existing refineries, petrochemical plants, we've supported in developing. So we want to support also in their transition and in reducing their emissions. Globally, in particular in CCUS, we've been supporting our clients from early engineering studies, in concept development, pre-FEED studies, FEED studies, and the UK and generally in Europe. Last year, we've been awarded the Aramis project, which is the flagship project, CO2 pipeline. Our team is involved in the FEED study, and it's going on. A lot of lessons learned in that. And we are very proud to be supporting also ADNOC in their mega-scale carbon capture project, and that's one of the first EPC projects in carbon capture that was announced. I mean, the scale is 1.5 million tons. So again, we're very proud of that achievement, and we look forward to utilize a lot of the lessons learned that we're doing, whether it's in the early engineering studies or in the EPC project, and supporting Oman also in their ambitions in CCUS. Proud to be with you today.
Thank you, Janie.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on the panel, and for my awesome co-panelists. I'm Karan. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of 4401. We are an Omani technology company. We provide CO2 mineralization to CO2 capture companies like Climeworks and others that are capturing CO2 from industrial facilities to facilitate the orderly transition towards net zero. The way that we do this is that we react CO2 with a host rock, the ophiolite that we find here in Oman, and the CO2 binds to that rock in a natural chemical process that we accelerate to turn that CO2 into inert minerals eliminated forever. So in that way, there are no gases that are floating in the subsurface or buoyant in the long term, and we're able to really take that away from existence permanently. We have so far, we're an Omani company, so we were born and bred here. We were formed during the pandemic, and we have already conducted pilots that have proved that the technology works in the subsurface in the ophelites of Oman. And we have since then scaled to the UAE, taken that Omani technology abroad, and are working with ADNOC as well on developing. We have developed a demonstration scale facility with them at the end of last year for COP28. We've made significant technology milestones between those two projects. We are taking that even further to develop additional projects in both countries, as well as taking this to other geographies in the world that have similar rock formations that can eliminate CO2. Such a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to this session.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. So I wanted to hear from you on your experience in the region and internationally for you, Karina. The MENA region, and particularly the GCC, has emerged as a champion, a CCS champion, with capacity of around 8% of the global CCS capacity. The Saudi Arabia particularly leading this effort, looking at 44 million tons by 2035, quite ambitious. And if we calculate the GCC's combined CCS capacity that's planned by 2050, that's around 80 million tons. That's really, really ambitious. Do you think that's achievable and realistic? And do you think the region needs to do more or less?
I mean, to put things into perspective, we're saying that in the next 10 years, at least Saudi's ambition, we're going to be capturing what we've been capturing since the 1970s. That's the scale. So it is quite ambitious. But one thing for sure is that, I mean, we've seen it happen with NEOM. So if there's an intention, there's always going to be a means to see it through and see it happening. So there are some countries that are well positioned in order to take the lead on this, like Saudi, for example. But there is, I mean, we were talking this morning about the work that you're doing in Oman, setting the regulatory framework and how to proceed. So I think this is a great first step, but it's going to take time. So I would say it's achievable, but we're gonna need to see more momentum for such volumes to be achieved and the set target.
Indeed, indeed. A lot of regulations, a lot of policy support needs to be in place to get us closer to that target that these countries have set for themselves. Karen, would you like to add to that?
In terms of mineralization, Oman actually plays pole position in the region. We have the largest deposits of the resource that we use for mineralization here in the country. So in my opinion, compared to the ambitions that Saudi Arabia has for conventional forms of storage, we can have the same level of ambition for developing not just storage, but complementary mineralization solutions as well here in the country. We have enough ophiolite, enough peridotite here in the country to eliminate all the CO2 emissions that Oman has ever emitted in the pre-industrial age. So we can definitely help it achieve net zero going forward, but also to remove all the emissions that have been previously emitted by the country and by the industrial manufacturing operations that we have here.
Indeed. Thanks, Karan. And Karina, what do you think the region needs to do to reach that goal, building on your experience in Europe?
We all mentioned, right? I do think that ambitions, it is a strong ambition, it is a big ambition, but I also think that it's fantastic that we have these types of conferences and that we have these side discussions to really sit in what the framework should look like in order to secure those ambitions. And it's great that we're having these discussions as soon as possible and early in the stage to gain that momentum that Jamie was mentioning about, so we can actually get the ball rolling. I do think that it is always really great to see countries who have a lot of oil and gas experience take on that experience and starts transitioning into the new energies. I do think in Europe we do have one big example of that, which is, for example, Norway, who is a known oil and gas producer and manufacturer who has really taken on that experience of storage, of infrastructure construction, of energy development, and taken that knowledge into moving into what is the new energy transition, the new era, the carbon capture, the direct air capture space. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed. So with the largest capacity, more or less, coming from EUR in the region, how do we see this shift into more decarbonization-focused projects, more, for example, CCS integrated hydrogen and ammonia, or synthetic fuel projects with direct air capture? Do we see that this transition is happening, or when do you think we'll be able to see large-scale decarbonization projects through CCS? So maybe Jamie?
Yes, sure. So I mean, let's be honest. Any CCS project needs to make economic sense for it to progress. Currently, as we speak today, EOR projects they generate revenue, right, through enhancing oil production. So on paper, they make economic sense and they're progressing. And we should be happy that at least we're learning from these projects in terms of capturing the CO2, storing it, transporting it, managing the CO2 as a byproduct, and getting lessons learned. Hopefully these lessons that are generated through the EOR would be implemented in terms of handling CO2 also in other projects. And that's definitely where we need to be progressing towards, a cleaner version of carbon capture. And hopefully through the works of Climeworks and 44.01, they will be able to progress their business case to scale up such projects.
Yep. Indeed. So do you see, Karina, sorry, Karen, yours.
I just want to add one point onto that. I think there's, EOR is kind of setting the stage for a lot of the same capital and resources that we require for all these other technologies. In the end, this is huge infrastructure that all of us are trying to build here. And there's so much shared resources and shared human capital that can be then contributed to, starting perhaps with EOR and then into these other spaces. So a great example, we had Ali here from OQGN that was speaking about the transportation networks that they're planning to build for CO2 in the country. This is, if the business case is currently present for EOR to facilitate the construction of those transportation pipelines, it's going to benefit all other forms of CO2 storage and capture as well in the future. So if there's ways that we can leverage off a first mover to build those essential pieces of the puzzle to then make the business case stronger for every other piece, I see no reason that we should stop. So this is definitely going to take us a long way already.
I like that. Learning from past experience and leading the way towards large-scale projects that would eventually pursue more carbon neutrality goals. So thanks so much, Karen and Jamie. I'm moving to Karina. If you could highlight to us the role of direct air capture and what it takes to make these technologies economically viable.
direct air capture really focuses on carbon removal, right? So we have been discussing of how to minimize our emissions, and that's what we're doing with industrial capture, which is something that we really need. It needs to be in place, and we will have all those lessons learned that Karan and Jamie just highlighted. But when we're looking at targets, climate zero or zero emissions, we need to add carbon dioxide removal into the equation. We have a series of options when it comes to CDR solutions, whether this is afforestation, planting trees, whether this is enhanced weathering. You also have the technological solution, which is direct air capture. We, at least at Climeworks, we are of the belief that since industry kind of got us where we are at the moment, industry will be able to save us, and we can find industrial solutions in order to minimize or in order to remove those historical emissions and that emissions that we cannot abate from the industries that we cannot abate in order to get to those net zero removal targets that we have today. So carbon capture solutions and essentially direct air capture are very nascent technologies, hence being expensive. And in order to scale up these technologies, or in order to make them economically feasible, as you mentioned, we have to build more. We have to scale, right? So I think it was a gentleman named Mr. Maddox from Texas Instrumental, people that had the calculators, who in the 70s came to the conclusion that the more calculators that you manufactured, the cheaper the manufacturing of the calculators would be, right? And we've seen this in several different industries, as for example solar, as for example wind, where by building more and more and more, we have just become cheaper in manufacturing, and solar nowadays is the cheapest megawatts that you can get in electricity. And we would expect, we wish to see the same for direct air capture, right? So to really have those learning curves of building more and manufacturing more in order to beat that cost curve, in order to gain the lessons learned, in order to gain the experience, right?
Thank you so much, Karina. That's very comprehensive and to the point. Indeed, we need a doubling of the capacity of CCS projects to reach a learning curve, at least 10% learning curve, to have some sort of cost competitiveness for direct air capture. And when do you think we'll start seeing these large-scale direct air capture projects? I know that Climeworks has a project in Kenya, 1 million ton. That's very, very impressive. Would you like to tell us more about it?
Definitely, happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we maybe starting by what we already have existent and in place.
Sure.
So Climeworks is a 15-year-old company. We really passed from, let's say, lab to pilot to scale up, and we've had our first commercially proven plants in operation in Iceland, where we do both the capture and the storage with the storage partner there. And so that has been operationed for over 3 years now. Just besides that plant, we have decided to scale up in 10 times capacity. And so the first plant is a 4,000 ton capacity plant. The second plant will be 40,000 ton, really very small compared to what we can do in the CCS space, obviously. But it is a start, right?
Yeah.
And so the ambition is, and the fact that we actually have modular units, the ambition is that we can lean on this modularity and multiply plants little by improving the technology, improving the efficiency of the technology, and scale up there. So our ambition is by the end of the decade to be able to build 1 megaton plants. Also a very challenging ambition, but we are putting our maximum efforts in order to get there. To build plants as big as possible, to actually become climate relevant and to get the cost curve down. And hence, yes, we have indeed a few projects announced, including that one in Kenya, which the team is developing, looking into to get into the 1 megaton capacity.
That's great news. Yeah, yeah. Karan, I know that you've explained a little bit earlier on how CO2 mineralization works. Can we elaborate on that, and what's the potential for CO2 mineralization in the MEA region, but also globally?
Chemistry lesson for all those in the room. The mineralization process is a natural reaction that's happening with the Omani ophiolites as well as other peridotite formations around the world. The rock itself is a volcanic igneous rock formation that's normally found as part of the ocean crust. But tectonic activity has thrust this crust up onto the surface in certain parts of the world, and we in Oman are endowed with the largest outcrop of this rock on the planet, which is just phenomenal. In that surficial form, it's reacting with CO2 in the atmosphere and absorbing that CO2 to turn it into inert mineral. So if you go hiking in any of the wadis here in the country, you can actually see some of the ophiolite formations with these really thick, beautiful white veins, which is solidified carbon dioxide trapped forever in mineral form in the rock. So what we're doing at 4401 is that we're accelerating this natural process to take in meaningful amounts of CO2 to become climate relevant, as Karina was mentioning. We do that by repurposing a lot of what the oil and gas industry is already doing in the country, taking reservoir engineers, taking drilling techniques, and engaging the rock formation in the subsurface to react with more CO2. The potential for the technology is very large. There are peridotite formations all over the world in significant quantities, and I'm talking now billions and billions of tons worth, trillions of tons worth across the world. It's a potential for us as an Omani company to take that technology that we've developed here and help other countries as well with their ophiolite formations decarbonize. We've seen it in other types of rocks, for example, the ones that Climeworks works with in Iceland and basalts as well. So mineralization really has the potential to scale very large and become very much a complementary solution to the conventional storage techniques that Jamie and her team are working on at Petrofac and ADNOC.
That's very impressive and very interesting. Thanks for that, Karen. Moving to Jamie, I want to learn more about your experience in project development in the region. And I know that Petrofac has just been awarded the EPC contract for the CCS project at Habshan in the UAE. What's the challenges that have been shaping the process so far, and how do you think those challenges, if any, could be overcome through regulations, through policies and incentives?
Yes, thank you for that. So in terms of the challenges, I'd like to touch upon the challenges not only in the project that we've been awarded with ADNOC, but like I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of early engineering, FEED studies and pre-FEED studies with global players in Europe as well. So the challenges that we see are common across. One, it comes to the design challenges that we have. So we have technology maturity, and is one angle that we are constantly challenged with, and studies that we're doing in Europe, for example. With ADNOC in particular, they've decided on a technology partner that is well established. But it cannot always be the case. And I'd like to give one example. We've been supporting a CHP plant in Stockholm, and they are right in the middle of Stockholm, surrounded by residential areas, schools, playgrounds, homes. And they wanted to become a negative emitter, so they wanted to capture all the CO2. Unfortunately, when we're doing the FEED study for them, you come to understand that you can't use very well established and mature technologies like the amine solutions, for example, because it's very hazardous in populated areas. So we started engaging with other technology providers for capturing the CO2. One of them is in the areas of a hot potassium carbonate, for example. Whilst their technology is of certain maturity, we found challenges in scaling up this technology because we needed to capture 800,000 tons of CO2 on that particular project, and it was challenging for that technology to achieve this scale of capturing. So the technology, we need to put more effort in not only focusing on amine technology development, but other sources of technology, because it's going to be important. Another challenge is the storage. I think we touched upon it today in the early morning sessions, that there needs to be a buy-in from the community as well, because there's a big question mark about, okay, we're capturing the CO2, but what will happen if you are injecting it in, I mean, in this part of the world, we worry about it polluting aquifers, and other parts of the world, again, touching upon Stockholm. Where will you inject it? Because in that particular project, there were underground caves that we were exploring injecting, but then again, you are in close proximity to residential areas. So there was a big pushback from the community on having it. When you start talking about long distance transportation of CO2, then your capex very quickly becomes very high, and your economic case no longer exists. So these are some of the challenges that we faced.
Thank you, Jamie. And I understand technology and it is key to having a successful implementation of the project, and diversification of those technologies needs to be possible. We need to have different options to make sure from a technical and economic point of view that it's going to work. So Karen, what about the CO2 mineralization challenges? What kind of challenges is it facing, not just in the region, but internationally?
So far, our experience has been in the region. We face very similar challenges as conventional storage operators would, that Jamie was mentioning before, in terms of scaling up. I think our biggest challenge right now, funnily enough, that you mentioned this, is getting CO2. We have CO2 that's being captured in Europe, and a business case that needs to be developed for storage. Here, we're developing the sinks, but we're not able to get our hands on enough CO2 to do so. So it's a significant constraint to us scaling up, because we don't have that necessary feedstock. And I think that comes down to incentives, to policy and structure to encourage industrial capture in the country. We have, willing direct air capture partners that would install direct air capture facilities here. As Karina mentioned, their target is to get to a megaton by 2030. Ambitious and I'm sure achievable, but we're looking at billions of tons that we need to get into the ground, and be net zero in Oman in particular by 2050. So we need to start putting structure in place to allow the manufacturers that are the emitters here in the country to capture that CO2 and deliver them to us. So that's definitely a constraint that we're feeling at the moment. Another one that Jamie brought up as well is essential community buy-in. And that social acceptance is a necessary part of any project that we are developing, as well as the sector that needs to develop that in the country and in the world. We've seen that be a significant part of developing projects in the US and in Europe as well. It's inevitably happening here also, and there is it makes sense. There is a lot of education and awareness that needs to go into this, and the sector for both mineralization as well as other forms of storage need to engage and develop strategies to do so. So we're learning, and we are developing techniques to do that, to engage, to raise awareness about why it is necessary to eliminate and store CO2, and most importantly, why the alternative of not doing anything is going to result in an even more hazardous or dangerous world than doing something in the first place.
Definitely, yeah. The social acceptance part is really crucial, and we're seeing that not just in the region but also globally. I'd like to go back to your point on incentives and policies that should support and could support CCS deployment, but also CO2 mineralization projects. What would 4401 like to see in terms of incentives and policies in place for the scale up and the speed of deployment?
There are a couple of options that we've seen work in other parts of the world. Europe and the US are two really interesting case studies as well as contrast case studies. We can see in the U.S. that there is more of a carrot approach. Yeah. Incentives are built in the form of tax credits, in the form of direct payments to encourage to build a business case. Going back to Jamie's wording, to encourage these industrial emitters to develop CCS projects that they can then benefit off from a revenue stream. It's working. There is significant scaled up projects that are being built in the US, and then that is also pushing the entire sector to develop storage and encourage the permitting of additional sinks in the US. In Europe, we're seeing the other kind of approach, which is more of a stick. It's a tax associated with continuing to emit, and that is also working, and I would admittedly say probably faster. But it is constraining the ability of certain types of technologies, because it then gets associated with how high the tax actually is and how that moves over time. What we're seeing in the region already is that there are several industries that are getting impacted by the tax system in Europe, especially the ones that are exporting products to that jurisdiction. So it's not just isolated. We're already seeing that knock-on effect going down the supply chains, and we in Oman are a manufacturing nation, and a lot of jobs rely on those manufacturing capabilities, and we pride ourselves on that. So there is an element of those jurisdictions that are being felt here. I think, and I know that the government is working on exploring different structures based on these case studies. I think either one at this point will definitely be a huge step forward in encouraging the capture of CO2 and then therefore the scale up of storage. So I'm not sure what the right answer is necessarily for our region, but any step forward will definitely help. Interesting.
Yeah. Agreed. Jamie, would you like to add anything?
Not really. I think Karan has pretty well defined it all. Any step forward is much required at this stage.
Indeed, indeed. So, yeah, in the previous session, in the first session, the Oman CCS task force, including the Ministry of Energy and Minerals and PDO, as well as OQGN, they announced the CCS regulatory framework in Oman, which will be a step closer to getting the regulations, the policies and the incentives in place for the successful implementation of these CCS ambitions in Oman. How do you think this could reflect on in terms of opportunities for project developers, and how do you like to see this developing into a more of a investment opportunity or investment environment for project developers?
So I'll start. I mean, definitely, if you have a clear set of regulations defining the expectations and the liabilities and setting the scene, it attracts investors because it provides a certain form of stability and visibility for investors to come in and develop long-term projects in the region. So it's a starting point, but projects need to be sustainable. They cannot rely only on tax incentives or regulations. They need to stand on their own. And for that to happen, it's related to technology maturity, it's related to collaboration among different elements that need to come in the CCS value chain, not only from regulators, investors, tech providers, OEMs, contractors. They need to all be aligned. So it's great, we need it, but it's not the only piece to the puzzle. It lays the ground.
Thank you, Jamie. And one last question to Karina. I'm sure you've mentioned some success stories there for direct air capture with Climeworks. What's the outlook for them to be replicated in the region? here.
So I actually think that the first step is really having this framework sit in, right? So for project developers, Jamie just mentioned, the less uncertainties you have in a development of a project, the more you can account for your risks and the easier it is to develop a project. So the fact that you start to work in what time of framework you can work, the easier it is to develop a project. Coming to the question itself, I mean, Climeworks does have a few success stories. Very proud to be working for Climeworks. I think in the last few years we have really achieved a series of milestones which are great for the direct air capture community. I think there's still an enormous path and way to go until we make the technology as efficient as possible and as cheap as possible. And so there's still a path to go there. But that path requires incentives. It is very difficult to build on a nascent technology and to be able to have the R&D for that technology and to be able to build up and scale without specific incentives that focus on R&D and focus on capital investments, whether this is with the carrot or the stick situation, so that there is a full carbon market and a mandatory carbon market, as currently direct air capture focuses only on voluntary carbon markets.
Thank you, Karina, and thank you, Jamie and Karen, for such an insightful discussion. I'll leave it to the audience if they have any questions for us.
So, Al-Mukhtar Saifi from Sohar Port and Free Zone. So, first of all, thank you very much for, the very great discussion. So, couple of questions. First of one for Karen, and then for Jamie. So, the first one for Karen. You said that there is no enough CO2, one of the challenges for carbon capture. So in Sohar, we contributed around 22% of the whole of Oman, so around maybe 20 million ton. That's it because of the industrial area. So how do you think that, how can we capitalize on this? How can we move forward? The second question for Karen, knowing that we need a good mix of everything moving forward toward the net zero. So, for example, renewable energy, energy storage, energy efficiencies. How much do you think that the percentage of carbon capture can contribute reaching the net zero? Is it like 10%, 20%, 15%? How much is it? Thank you very much.
I'm happy to start answering the first question. Sohar is an incredible opportunity in the country. It is an industrial cluster, and I think coming back to one of the points I made earlier, shared infrastructure is so significant in bringing the cost down for the entire carbon capture and storage ecosystem. If you have a cluster of industrial emitting sites, you can build shared infrastructure for capture, you can build shared infrastructure for conditioning, for transportation systems or let's say drop-off or collection points, and that can then transport CO2 to a storage facility. Sohar is particularly interesting as well because you have peridotites that are very, very close to the industrial city, 50, 60 kilometers away. So there is a significant capability for mineralization for 4401 to facilitate some of the decarbonization of the industrial city of Sohar. I think the challenge becomes how do you ensure that there can be different technologies to facilitate the different types of CO2 production facilities that you have in the port itself. So there's steel, cement, natural gas power, LNG. I think there's some fertilizer facilities. There's many, many different types of emission sources, and then the challenge comes down to designing a shared infrastructure that can facilitate all types of capture. But the opportunity is that each emitter doesn't have to figure out a solution for themselves. And I think that's one of the biggest constraints in terms of speed and scale for our sector, is that people are still trying to understand how do we do this. They want to get into the industry to figure out how to capture, to figure out how to mineralize, and we get a lot of inbounds asking us those questions. If we can develop a shared approach to addressing all of these industries, we can learn from each other. And I guess speaking to the topic of this panel, we can share those learnings across the multiple industries that are present in these industrial clusters. So I think Sohar has a particularly fantastic opportunity to contribute directly to and quickly to the net zero transition.
So I think the question for me was, how much do you need to be capturing to achieve net zero?
I mean,
if I got it correctly.
The whole of Oman, we have,
You need to,
everything.
exactly.
How much carbon capture can
I think you already have, as part of as part of net zero, ultimately by 2050 you need to be capturing 100% of your CO2 emissions and methane in addition to achieve net zero. You've got a target by 2030 to be 25% reduction in CO2. And I think particularly in Sohar, you've got the opportunity to monetize your CO2. And it can actually be a revenue generating stream for you, especially for projects SAF projects, methanol projects would require this CO2. And as Karen said, it doesn't have to be the job of only the cement manufacturers or the steel. Common infrastructure is hubs, creating hubs, and I think it's part of the task force point of discussions. The creation of hubs supports in reducing the capex costs per industry. I mean, the challenge there is different flue gases have different CO2 compositions that would entail different technologies. But ultimately, there can be shared pipelines, shared subsurface storage. You wouldn't need it, at least the CO. If I were CO2 Sohar, I would be selling my CO2. But
hi, thanks to the panelists. My name is Mohamed Kalmani. I've got 3 quick questions, 2 to Karan. So first question, are you just considering in situ CO2 mineralization, or are you considering ex situ? Second question is, technically the end game of this is to sell carbon credits. Given the fact that there is no carbon market currently established in the country, where are you planning to sell these carbon credits? The third question is to Karina. It's related to carbon capture as a technology. At the moment, it's priced around 400, I want to say?
no.
Okay, so what is the projection downwards? Yeah. What's the projection downwards, and where do you see it in the next 10 years in terms of price per ton of CO2?
So I'll start with the first one. Currently, we're focused entirely on in situ mineralization. There's a reason for that. We find that the ability to scale in the subsurface is significantly more powerful than trying to move and crush rocks in order to access the mineralization process through an ex situ procedure. So we believe that moving the CO2 from hubs in particular to a shared storage sink has a much larger potential to scale than moving the rock to the CO2. So that's what we're focused on for the moment. In terms of your second question, it's a very good one. Carbon markets, the integration of carbon markets internationally is an ongoing debate and subject across the world. What we don't have today in Oman is a way to integrate, and I think the Ministry of Energy, as well as other players, and I believe there's now a work stream for carbon markets within the CCS policy framework, is exploring the avenues to do that. At the moment, we're working with the voluntary markets, what Karina had mentioned before. So you have voluntary players all over the world that are committed to sourcing high-quality, permanent credits for their compliance mechanisms. So these are not recorded necessarily against any NDCs. They are entirely in a voluntary space. So the next steps that the country needs to do, as well as the industry needs to do as a whole, is to now understand how to account for those emissions, for those credits within the country frameworks, within the industrial frameworks, and then eventually within compliance mechanisms for shareholder reporting and the larger financial markets. So we're definitely not there yet. There's a lot of work as a sector to do to get there, but there are frameworks being put in place. So there is a lot of debate, for example, about Articles 6.2 and 6.4 that will enable the trade of credits all over the world, and that is one element that is being explored, I believe, in the work stream within the Ministry of Energy, although I can't personally comment to its progress.
I got a question about technology. I think Jamie and Karina mentioned or touched base on the challenges with the new technologies, at least, and scalability and so forth. Do you think there is enough focus globally by governments and organizations in funding and devoting the right fund for R&D and working with academia and technology developers at early stages, and that probably will expedite maybe driving the cost down, getting efficient technology, expediting maybe even project development, so starting from the root rather than working only with a project as a project and trying to incentivize projects. Why don't we incentivize the academia and the researchers to come up with advanced technology or advancing the existing technology even?
Sure. So I do agree. I mean, we need to speed up the technology progress. I personally don't believe that they are getting the necessary funding that they require to trailblaze and achieve what we need them to achieve within this short time frame. I can speak about what we're doing at Petrofac. So we are in the UK. We're engaged with some universities, for example, Cranfield universities. We support them in some detailed engineering, because to help them understand what the market requires, what project developers require. So we have that kind of relationship ongoing. We are also in close collaboration with technology providers that have TRL level above 5. Let's say, because it's part of the requirements, right? We, as part of our service offerings, we have to run technical evaluations for our clients and nominate best technologies at the moment. So we do have that dialogue always ongoing, and we hear back from them. We hear about their frustration, and I'm sure Karina is going to touch on that next, that whilst there's a lot of schemes that they have to apply for fundings and stuff, they don't always get the amount that they need and the time frame that they need.
Or the framework is just not suitable for what you're looking for, indeed, yeah. I would just want to add one point to that, which would be, although I do agree that more investment in early research is required, right? To also bring more direct air capture technologies, for example, and to improve the ones that are existing, but to bring it all into place. I'm also a true believer that you don't know what you don't know until you know. And there are certain things which you need to have in operation to order to really understand what are the costs. And many times in these R&D projects, you don't get the full picture of how scalable the technology is and how the cost will actually look once you put that technology in place. So although I do agree that more funds for research are required, I don't think that we should only focus on that and not focus on actually implementing these researchers to actually understand how to scale them up.
And that's the importance of running pilot and demonstration projects. I mean, it's fundamental.
Can I just answer the question on costs?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I was going to mention that we just skipped that one.
Sure. Yeah. So the current cost of direct air capture is, I would say, around $1,000 per ton of CO2, which is astronomical. It is massive. And you can see, essentially, when we're discussing about how this is voluntary market, you can see how it is difficult for many companies to actually say, I'm going to commit some of my funds and some of my revenues to decrease my carbon footprint, considering this enormous high price tag. I think it is very difficult for me to make projections on how we see the costs to go. We have a series of estimations within Climeworks where we really see the cost to track down, and we think it will come to a stable, let's say, $300 to $250 per ton once the whole market levels out. That's kind of the estimations within the next 15 years, I would guess. But I do think forecasts are difficult. Looking to the past is a bit easier. And I mentioned solar a while ago. I do think that solar is a very interesting example when it comes to scale up. And if we look at the price of solar today and compare it to how it was 15 years ago, the cost of megawatt hour has decreased by 90%, right? In 2009, which was yesterday, the cost was 90% higher. They have, because there were mainly three factors which led to this fantastic decrease in pricing. The first factor was the investment in R&D, so really improving the efficiencies of the panels and assuring that the technology was the best it could be. The second factor was really a place, and it was kind of like led by Germany at the time, for the feed-in tariffs, what they called. So basically, the governments turned to energy developers and said, hey guys, if you develop an renewable energy project, I will assure you that I will pay for those megawatts generated. I will pay it at 2 times the price of the market, and I will pay you for 20 years. And that removed completely any risks and any concerns for a project developer, and everybody just went for it, right? And so you had more and more projects being developed, the price of the panels and of the solar projects just coming down, and in the meantime, you had China, who went into the solar business as well, and hence more panels being built, costs coming down, more incentives and more policies around solar, and we just had this beautiful cycle which has led to the current decrease in prices, right? And so when I look at direct air capture, I really hope that this is a playbook and a model that we can follow when it comes to trends and when it comes to learning processes. I hope that answered your question.
Do we have any more questions?
This is Mohammed. Thank you very much for the very fruitful discussion. Quick question I have on the Climeworks technology. So do you see any obstacles related or barriers with the supply chain of the material for your technology when you're talking scaling up at huge scales? That's it.
No, it's yes, it is one of our biggest challenge. I didn't get that question, but indeed, supply chain is one of our biggest challenge. So our challenge one is where do we put a plant, right? You have to have the good energy, you have to have the storage. But challenge two is really securing that supply chain. And we do see that our projects are getting bigger and bigger, our designs are getting bigger and bigger, and that supply chain is still lagging a bit behind. Essentially when it comes to the manufacturing of sorbents. So our solar panels are our sorbents, actually, that is our main concern. I mean, it is really a very niche market at the moment, and hence still trying to develop and secure that supply chain so that you can actually scale up.
Well, thank you so much, Karina, Jamie, and Karan, for such a very, very insightful discussion. Really appreciate your feedback. And to wrap this up, we have a break for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, starting now. Maybe we can have a round of applause to our speakers today.